Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at production function, the very first practice problem with this unit. And so this is going to be good kind of to review some of the ideas that we learned in the simulation, but also that we talked about in the lecture. So the first part is just kind of filling out the table and answering some questions. So the first thing to observe is for the 0th unit, we're not going to have a marginal because it's going to be a rate of change over the change in total product over the change in the number of inputs. And now for this, the inputs are given to us in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 quantities of 1 every time. So it's really just going to be what's the change in total product. So when we go from 0 to 10, the change in total product is 10, 10 to 25, 15, and we're going to kind of do the rest here really quick. 15, 10, 5, 0, and then -5. And we see here that kind of classic pattern of increasing marginal product and then downward, 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 diminishing marginal returns, and then a negative return at the very last worker. What's the cause, though, of these increasing? Why does it go from 10 to 15 to 20? Well, that's because the workers start to specialize. And that's something that we learned during the simulation, is that everybody kind of picks a particular job and does that one job really well. You pick what you have comparative advantage in, and then you specialize, and that actually allows you to see these productivity gains. But at a certain point, because of the fixed inputs and increasing your variable inputs, you have the fixed ones that are fixed, you end up with less and less marginal product eventually. So it kind of peaks and then it starts to come back down again. And we would say that that begins, right? Which one does it begin with? Is the 4th worker. It doesn't begin with the 3rd worker. That's actually the last worker where they see the increase. And that's because like this 3rd is actually happening like between 2 and 3. And then between 3 and 4 is actually when the 15 happens. So it's right after the 3rd worker, or it begins with the 4th worker is what we would say. What's the cause of that happening? Well, as you increase variable inputs, right, increase output at lesser rate because of fixed inputs. And so we would just say the existence really of that fixed inputs is going to cause the output to rise, but at a decreasing rate, because you keep adding more and more workers, but they only have a limited number of fixed tools and capital equipment and machinery and that sort of thing. What describes the slope of the total product function for the diminishing marginal returns range? So we're kind of saying like this is stage 1, and then we've got stage 2, and then stage 3. And so what would describe the slope of total product, that is to say here, as we're kind of going? And what we'd find is that it is a positive slope, right? It's still going upward, 60, 70, 75. It's kind of going upward, but it's not going to be at quite the pace that it used to be. And so we're going to say a decreasing and positive slope for this range of the product function. Now we're going to return to the data that we did on page 2 with our simulation. And if you weren't present for our simulation, I've got some kind of example numbers here that we could use. And again, this is for the production simulation that we did in class. That's the paper chain. So these are some good numbers to use. Again, if you weren't present, if you were present, your numbers are going to look a little bit different, but you'll be okay. The marginal product, again, is just going to be the change in the total product divided by the change in quantity of labor, or inputs. And in this case, it's just going to be over 1 every time because we're changing the number of workers by 1. So here we have 6, 8, 6, 5, 3, and 1. And we still see that kind of pattern of rising marginal product, then falling marginal product. Probably if we hired a 7th worker with this data set, we would have seen negative marginal returns. Now, the next 3 columns don't quite deal with marginal product. They deal with costs. FC stands for fixed cost. VC stands for variable cost. TC is, add them together, total cost. And so fixed cost is the cost of your fixed inputs. And during the simulation, we talked about that the stapler and the scissors are your fixed inputs. They're not changing in number. And so it's $10 for both of those combined. And that's true regardless of how many workers we had. So $10 all the way down. That's kind of nice. Fixed cost always going to be the same. Hence the name fixed. Now, the neat part is if we know the fixed cost, we know that at 0 product, fixed cost still exists. Total cost is still going to exist. That's going to be $10 because we didn't have any workers. The variable cost is going to be the $12 per worker. Well, that's 12 for the first worker, 24 for the second worker, 36 for the third, 48 total, right? We're not saying $48 went to the 4th worker. We're saying we had 4 workers, they were $12 each. 60 and 72. And now we just add 10 to every one of those and we get the total cost. So 22, 34, 46, 58, 70, and 82. And one last thing we can observe about here is that if we don't know the variable cost numbers, we could still figure out what that variable cost is by actually looking at the change in the total cost. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, is there's some underlying relationships in here. Now, if there's particular abbreviations that you need help with, you might want to take them down here so that you can then ask questions later. But let's return back to the practice problems here using our data that we just constructed. Overall, what happened to marginal product as the quantity of labor increased? Well, it started to go up and then it went back down again. And so we would say it went up, then down, right? And why? Well, specialization for the first part, right? That's the explaining that part. And this part is explained by diminishing marginal returns, because the adding of each additional input, right? When you've got a fixed inputs as well, when you keep adding variable inputs, more workers, you're going to get less and less out of them. And that's what we call diminishing marginal returns. It's so true that it's a law, the law of diminishing marginal returns. Now, did it demonstrate increasing marginal returns? Yes, it did. And we see that when we went from, from 6 to 8. And that's the idea of the increasing marginal returns, marginal product, increasing marginal returns. Yes. And from quantity of labor, let's say 0 through quantity of labor 2, 0 to QL2. So that's the range of the quantity of labor where which that's true. Did it demonstrate diminishing marginal returns? Yes, it did. It went from 8 to 6 to 5 to 3 to 1. And so we'd say actually from quantity of labor 3 to all the way down to QL6. And we aren't going to have any negative, because no negative marginal product. But you very well might. Like if we had the sixth worker, maybe this was a -1 and that had been a 27 instead of a 29, we would say, well, with the sixth worker, there was negative marginal returns. So hopefully this helps you make sense a little bit more of the production function. I'll see you next time.